I don't need to read some NGO's statement here. I'll give you the actual international cases that happened. This is some advice for the West in the future. That included attacking and taking over Georgian villages South Ossetians have never historically inhabited.
Hi guys, welcome to another video, and in today's video I'll be fact checking this Irish TikToker who has a whole account dedicated to Ossetian nationalism. Specifically, we'll be looking at a video where he talks about the 2008 Russian invasion of Georgia,
2008 in the early hours of the morning,
and we will discuss the various pieces of Russian propaganda he scatters throughout the video.
So first, just a quick summary of the 2008 war for those who may know of it but aren't very intimate with the details. Georgians, since the time of the USSR, were a thorn in the side of Russia. Georgia, along with the Baltic states, was a frontrunner in the dissolution of the USSR. The leader of the USSR at the time essentially gave an ultimatum. Alright, my hands are up. You caught me in a bit of a pickle. I've got one trap card for you though, Georgia. You can have your independence, but we're kind of taking some territories from you. But don't worry, I mean, that was just Gorbachev, so Russia wasn't that bad. At the time of Boris Yeltsin, after each country respectively got their independence, Russia, funded separatist wars, mediated ceasefires, bombed Georgia some more after the ceasefires, mediated more ceasefires, and then created the Sochi Agreement, which created de facto rebel-controlled areas within Georgia. There was a real modus vivendi between the two parties. Russia promised to be the peacekeepers in Georgia while also bombing and violating Georgia. It was quite a good time, but the turn of the century had to ruin the good thing that was going on, and tensions started rising. In 2003, there was a Rose Revolution in Georgia. It had its first democratic elections in a long time, with President Saakashvili coming into power. Putin wasn't a real fan of that, so tensions began to rise, with various events happening in 2006, like the banning of Georgian wine, and yada yada yada. Putin was quite reminiscent of his old ally Shevardnadze, who was a Soviet-time politician and quite favourable towards Putin. But then in 2008, at NATO's April summit, it was agreed that Georgia and Ukraine would one day be members of NATO. However, further action was postponed until December, and this created a window of opportunity. The Kremlin decided there and then that it must act to prevent these countries, particularly Georgia at the time, to exit its sphere of influence. It must intervene. After bad spats of violence in August 2008 on the borderline, Saakashvili ordered a unilateral ceasefire, a no-shoot order to the military, in order to bring back peace negotiations to the fore. However, despite this, as a fact, South Ossetian militia did not stop bombing Georgian villages in the area they claimed in South Ossetia, and at 11 p.m, 7th of August 2008, President Saakashvili was informed that a convoy of more than 100 Russian military vehicles had crossed the border through the Rocky Tunnel and were entering Georgia as they spoke, in what even Russia considered de jure Georgian land. At this point, Georgia not only had Abkhazian and South Ossetian militia forces fighting in its own territory, it now had a Russian convoy heading straight towards Tkhin Valley, and in response, Georgia moved the military into Tkhin Valley to secure the city, the rebel capital, and bomb the Rocky Tunnel, trying to stop the convoy in its tracks before it got to Tkhin Valley to launch an offensive against the rest of Georgia. At around 10 a.m, 8th of August, the full Russian invasion of Georgia began, with full air, sea, and ground support. On the 9th of August, the Abkhazian invasion joined in. On the 11th of August, Georgian troops were pushed back to Gori, where the Russian offensive continued into Georgia proper. Finally, on the 12th of August, with the help of EU President Sarkozy, a ceasefire was announced, with Russia fully withdrawing by October, leaving all captured areas of Georgia plundered and looted. As per Putin's plans, Georgia's NATO aspirations were now at an all-time low. After the war, Georgia was devastated economically, with important harbours, ports and infrastructure targeted, and politically, leading to discontent with Saakashvili.
We demand from Washington, down with dictator! Down with dictator!
And his replacement by the Kremlin-backed Georgian Dream Party. Georgia was now firmly back within Russia's reach. South Ossetia and Abkhazia were essentially reduced to Russian puppet states, no more independent than Kadyrov's Chechnya. Their populations now all spoke Russian, had obligatory Russian passports and citizenship, had their budgets and educational material controlled by Russia, their borders controlled by Russia, and, as established by several international courts, from the ICC to the ICJ to the European Court of Human Rights, they are now legally occupied by Russia and are legally considered part of Russia. That is a sad ending to a sad story. Okay, now that you have an overview of the conflict, let's watch the video.
Today marks the 15th anniversary of one of the darkest days in the modern history of South Ossetia. On August 8th.
Alright, this is a horrible start to the video. Saying that the war started on the 8th of August erases everything that was already going on in the 7th of August and the days previous to it. The fact that Ossetian militia were bombing Georgian villages with innocent civilians, and also the fact that a convoy of more than 100 Russian military vehicles was invading Georgia is completely erased. And we'll just start the conflict with when Georgia retaliated. Doesn't really make sense.
No, but seriously, it doesn't make sense. So I know this guy is Irish, so instead of talking in terms of South Ossetia and Georgia, let's talk about in terms of Northern Ireland and Ireland. Let's imagine the UK, after the Government of Ireland Act in 1920, creating Northern Ireland, thought, wow, this Republic of Ireland government is pretty annoying, and we're pretty reminiscent of the British Empire where we controlled the whole island. So we're going to assemble a military convoy of 100 military vehicles on the border, and we're just going to, by accident, let them in and start a political invasion of the Republic of Ireland. I wonder how that would go down in the international community. But let's test this idea with a game show! The premise of today's game show is to find out whether letting volunteer militia cross your border into another country is an invasion. Let's go!
Hey ChatGPT.
Hey there, how's it going? What can I do for you today?
So I'm going to be asking you some questions, okay?
Got it. I'll make sure to keep my answers straightforward and unambiguous. Feel free to ask me anything.
Okay, so let's create an imaginary scenario where I'm a country and I'm a peacekeeping nation in a conflict with a neighboring country, but secretly I've been favoring the rebel side. Let's say there's a military build-up in my border of around 100 military vehicles with supposed volunteers, and I just let this 100 vehicle military build-up cross through the border and go into my neighbouring country to help the rebels and take down my antagonistic country's government. Is that a problem? Would that be maybe considered an act of war?
Absolutely, that would likely be considered an act of war. When a country allows or supports a military force to cross into another country with the intention of overthrowing its government, it is generally seen as an aggressive act.
Oh, I mean, that's a really interesting insight, ChatGPT, thank you.
You're very welcome. I'm glad you found it interesting.
And in my opinion, this is some advice for the West in the future. They need to stop playing coy with these obvious acts of aggression. The way the Western system works is, unless a country explicitly sends a declaration of war, then, there are possible other explanations and that war can be avoided and, they didn't mean it. That's just an antique of the past. The West needs to realize when Russia does these covert acts of aggression, for example, sending little green men into eastern Ukraine, oh, it's not us, they don't have Russian insignia, that's obviously a dumb excuse. That is obviously Russia. And the West needs to stop pretending it's not, otherwise we can't do effective, relevant responses in relation to that aggression.
But back to the topic on hand. Did the war start on the 8th or the 7th? Spoiler alert, it's the 7th and even Russia can't hide it.
You know it's bad when internationally and in Russia the war is known as the 5-Day War, and the ceasefire happened on the 12th. So what are we even arguing about? You can do the maths. Also, Russian Wikipedia can't even get to grips with its own propaganda. The Wikipedia calls the war the August 8th War, but then later states, oh yeah, it lasted from August 7th to August 12th. So what are we even arguing about here? This is an argument made from complete cognitive dissonance.
A day like any other, really.
If your any other day is a day on the very brink of war, its primary motivation is to instigate international mess to block Georgian NATO ambitions.